Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be presenting on the topic poverty and the environment in the Caribbean, identifying a framework for sustainable development. The contents of the presentation are as follows. I'll provide a brief introduction to the issues and also provide definitional terms of both poverty and the environment. Further, I will review some of the literature that is associated with the nexus between poverty and the environment, and then show this relationship within the Caribbean context. This is followed by an introduction to the Payments for Environmental Services framework and an illustration of how such a framework has operated in practice through a case study example. And finally, I'll review the applicability of such a framework to small island developing states. So why the need to look at the relationship between poverty and the environment? The answer lies in the fact that there are two issues. These two issues have a dual relationship. The environment provides several services, such as provisioning, food, fresh water, fuel, etc., regulating, climate regulation, flood regulation, and supporting services such as nutrient cycling and soil formation for life on Earth. But the vulnerable in society also affects the environment and may even degrade the environment through use and misuse, such as slash and burn agriculture and overfishing. But before I proceed with this dual relationship, I will provide several definitional terms. Firstly, what is poverty? There are several definitions ranging from simple income consumption terms to a broader social dimension term. The United Nations Development Programme defines poverty as deprivation in the most essential capabilities of life, such as a long, healthy life, being knowledgeable, having adequate economic provisioning, and participating fully in the life of the community. This definition resonates with the work of Amartya Sen's Entitlements and Capabilities. Another term that is closely linked to poverty is that of sustainable livelihoods, which is defined as a way of thinking about the objectives, scope, and priorities for development in order to enhance progress in poverty elimination. This term is closely linked to the overall concept of sustainable development, which is defined as development that meets the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. A simple environmental concept is that where it is described as a natural resource base that provides sources and performs sink functions. So what is the relationship between poverty and the environment? The Brundtland Commission report of 1987 provides the relationship in a nutshell. It states that poverty is a major cause and effect of global environmental problems. It is therefore futile to attempt to deal with environmental problems without a broader perspective that encompasses the factors underlying world poverty and international inequality. This statement shows that both issues have to be dealt with simultaneously, and examining one without the other will be ineffective to finding solutions to these challenges. In the literature, there are several theories that describe this relationship. I'll just briefly go through three of these theories, and the others are listed there for reference. The first one, the downward spiral or orthodox approach, states that the poor are forced to deplete environmental resources for survival, and as such, this degradation for survival, and such degradation further impoverishes them. The Porter hypothesis states that people may be more inclined to reduce negative environmental activities if they see and understand the value of environmental protection. And the concept of environmental entitlements, which states that there is no direct linkage between environmental change and impoverishment, and benefits from the environment are structured by institutions. So I'll now put it in the context of the Caribbean on small island developing states. The literature reveals that poverty in the Caribbean ranges from a low of 9.3% in Bahamas to a high of 65% in Haiti. Several countries also have poverty levels that are over 35%, such as St. Vincent and the Grenadines, with a rate of 37.5%, Guyana, 35%, and Dominica, 39%. There are several reasons for these high levels of poverty, and these include volatility of incomes and other factors such as income distribution. In terms of the environment, there are two main areas of environmental degradation, amongst others, and I'll address that of land degradation and threats to biodiversity. The figure shows the degraded areas as a percentage of national territory for Latin America and the Caribbean. This Jeff UNEP FAO project, GLADA, which is a global assessment of land degradation and improvement, states that 14% of the world's land degradation occurs in Latin America and the Caribbean. In the Caribbean, the problem is most serious in Guyana, with 43.4%, and Haiti, with 42.6%. And the Caribbean countries are highlighted in the diagram. You can see Guyana and Haiti is extremely high, just next to Guatemala, the highest. The causes, actually, let me go back to there. The causes for such degradation include, but not limited to, the following. Firstly, agriculture. The negative environmental effects of agriculture include the conversion of land that was previously covered by forests and the exploitation of natural resources, such as soil and water. UNEP 2003 identifies that the expansion of agricultural production led to the conversion of land previously covered by different types of vegetation, predominantly forests, as well as the increased exploitation of natural resources such as soils and water, thus aggravating the existing process of soil degradation. Another cause of such land degradation is that of soil erosion. Again, according to UNEP 2010, the Caribbean subregion has marked seasonal variations in precipitation, and most of its territories suffer from prolonged droughts, followed by torrential rains that intensify soil erosion. Several countries of the Caribbean, due to their volcanic origins, such as Dominica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and St. Lucia, and coral-based Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, and some areas of Jamaica, are highly vulnerable to degradation from erosion. Thirdly, the intensive use of fertilizers and pesticides has several effects on both ecosystems in the form of degradation and contamination of soils, air, and water, and on human health. In the Caribbean, Belize has the highest intensity of herbicide and insecticide use. Another threat to the environment is that of threats to biodiversity. The diagram shows the reefs at risk index and the categories of threats. You can see in the first column it's coastal development, second column sedimentation, marine-based pollution, overfishing, and an integrated threat. According to Burke and Maiden, the reefs at risk index indicate that nearly 2/3 of coral reefs in the Caribbean are threatened by human activities. And these threats by human activities are coastal development, which is 33%, marine-based pollution, 15%, overfishing, 60%, and sedimentation, 33%. So it can be seen that there are interactions between society and the environment. From a study by the Sustainable Economic Development Unit in 2008, this relationship was examined closely in 4 Windward Islands, and it was revealed that the most vulnerable in society are usually dependent on the environment for survival. And this is simply in terms of agriculture and overfishing and fishing. So the framework that I'm proposing, and this is a work in progress, to effect changes in both the poverty situation and the environmental situation in the Caribbean is that of the Payments for Environmental Services framework, which is simply called, and later on in the presentation, as the PES framework. What is the PES framework? Mehran and Paquin, 2004, defined these systems as one that support positive environmental externalities through the transfer of financial resources from beneficiaries of certain environmental services to those who provide these services or are fiduciaries of environmental resources. The logic of the PES scheme lies in the fact that there are few direct benefits to be derived from land uses such as land conservation. Further, these benefits tend to be less than other options for land uses such as conversion to cropland or pasture. In the first column in the diagram, you'd see conversion to pasture. The benefits are high for ecosystem managers, but the costs are also high for downstream population and others, such as reduced water services, loss of biodiversity, and carbon emissions. As a result, payments from beneficiaries can offer an incentive for ecosystem managers to undertake conservation. The second and third column shows that forest conservation and forest conservation with service payments, where minimum payments can be made to ecosystem managers to both affect the land users as well as the beneficiaries. The basic structure of the pest system consists of several elements. Firstly, there's a need to identify what environmental services exist, and so this entails defining, measuring, and quantifying environmental services that are to be created under the system. Secondly, the recognition of those who benefit from such environmental services, and these can be local, national, or regional. Thirdly, the financing mechanism would look at the costs of such a system, cost of establishing such a system, the payment to land users, and the ongoing costs of the system. The payment scheme is a means of delivering funds to land users, and these payments should be sufficient to compensate the cost of conservation efforts and the opportunity cost of foregone land uses. And finally, there's a need to assess the existing regulatory and fiscal environment to ensure that the pest system would be effective. And this is referred to as the governance structure in the diagram. An example of a successful pest system through public policy is that of Costa Rica. Costa Rica has been known to be one of the pioneers of the use of payments for environmental services in developing countries. The introduction of the Pago por Servicios Ambientales has resulted in a change from having one of the highest rates of deforestation to negative rates of deforestation in 2000. And Russman, 2006, also found that 92% of PSA recipients in the Osa Peninsula had their farm on the forest or bush, as compared to 72% for non-recipients. So the question is, can this system be applied in the context of small island developing states, and specifically that of the Caribbean? There have been several studies that have focused on the feasibility of market instruments for watershed services. And I'll now refer to one, that of the Who Pays for Water, preparing for the use of market-based mechanisms to improve the contribution of watershed services to livelihoods in the Caribbean. This study was undertaken by the International Institute for Environment and Development in collaboration with the Caribbean Natural Resources Institute, CANARI, and other partners, including CEDU. The study found that there are several challenges to development of watershed, and these are listed here. The first is a fragmented policy and institutional framework, which states that there are conflicting laws and incentives from different sectors, which makes it difficult to have an integrated approach to watershed management. The second challenge is that of informal land occupancy. There's a lack of security of tenure, which makes it almost impossible to have formal contractual arrangements. Thirdly, the scarcity of willing downstream buyers. The study identified that remedial action required upstream were not matched by the number of downstream buyers. High transaction costs. Due to the small scale of watersheds and the value of the services, there were high transaction costs. And finally, data gaps and insufficient human capacity. Institutions are limited in resources to expand research in data gaps and also to design and conduct economic analyses for the potential of payment schemes. These challenges beg the questions, how do we overcome these challenges? And I will simply go back to the main elements of the PEST scheme to address these challenges. So there's a need to identify and quantify environmental services in order to develop a framework. That was the first one. It should be noted that there have been several valuation studies, and some of these are listed here, that have been undertaken in the Caribbean to identify environmental services. As such, these studies can be used as inputs for developing formal PEST systems. Secondly, governance structures. There's a need to review existing institutional legal frameworks and the identification of new structures that can help PEST system. And this is specifically in terms of land tenure systems and how we can formalize that aspect of security of tenure. Thirdly, payment mechanisms. There's a need to review the current scheme that deliver incentives to land users. Such systems may have to be examined in the context of more formal arrangements that link livelihood practices, such as agriculture, to specific environmental services, such as erosion control.